for for building the kind of resilience that we all need for the future. And we believe that the sector has a big role to play. All of us know it instinctively. All of us have worked in various ways, whether it's, working with wastage, whether it's recycling, whether it's, working with natural materials from fiber to farm. But maybe, maybe we can try now to come together and build a common understanding across various platforms, pool in the wisdom that all of us, and so many of us working in the sector have developed, have the experience, the understanding, the work with communities. And it's time maybe for us to come together and build on that so that we can build a very, very strong, informed narrative, one for all of us working in the sector, and two, the hope that out of this coming together and discussions, some initiatives, some pilots, some ways of, looking at a much significant impact may emerge. And that's really the purpose of creative dignity of any network. So with that hope, we began this series, what we're calling the Creative Talks, and we thought that let's focus on any one subject and let's take a deep dive in it instead of changing subjects for all our monthly meetings. So we were very lucky that we met Surucchi in the meantime, who had also joined the network. And Surucchi, as many of you know, does have a journalistic background. She has also worked in CSR companies, on CSR projects. She was a journalist. She was leading some of the initiatives at the Voice of Fashion. And her interest, I think, spans across not only, journalism around art, aesthetics, and now sustainability. I think that's something she has now taken on as the next path in her life. As I'm sure there are many people here today on the call, who also are have dedicated their lives towards that. So here's Suruchi. We got her to anchor this whole series of talks that we are developing. And this is the first talk she's put together. So thank you, Suruchi, Bhakti, and Shoiba are the members on the team for putting this together. And I'll hand it over to Hugh from here to take it forward.
Thank you, Meera, for this kind introduction. You've summed it up really well. And I'm so glad to be part of this network to kind of, anchor this very important discussion and initiative. I'll start with some housekeeping rules so, we know where we are heading and how we are going to use our time. We'll give the first 50 minutes to the conversation with the speakers, the agenda setting, which will be followed by 10 minutes of question and answers where, you can directly ask panelists questions that you have, or if you would want, you can put it in the chat box while the conversation goes on and we'll facilitate it. We'll have closing remarks followed by that by Meera, and I'll take another 10 minutes. So this is how we are placed. I would like to start this discussion by reflecting on the first-hand impact climate crisis had on the artisan communities this year. The big flood after 1995 hit Maheshwar. It led to material and livelihood loss for weavers. The biggest glacial outburst in Sikkim after 1968, and we have Sonam joining us from Sikkim. And, I had this interesting conversation with him before this talk. And this data comes from him that what happened with these floods in terms of connection to the artisan-entrepreneur communities, that it kind of distanced and disconnected them briefly from the local and national markets. Almost 2,000 kilometers away from here in the Tuna village that lies by the coastlines of Kutch, Gujarat, an environment journal, Mongabe, reported that delayed onset of winters is affecting the quality of the wool for weavers, while erratic rains there is making pottery unsustainable for potters there, which is the traditional craft form. When we at Creative Dignity started working on understanding depth of climate-centric impact on craft economies, we turned to an intersectional examination of climate change emergencies. The unpredictable downpours leading to destructive floods in our villages and cities, or the slow yet relentless rise in temperatures. These events undeniably are part of the grand tapestry of the climate crisis. However, We thought to grasp its full scope, let's go deeper and reflect on the gradual shifts in the resource base that surrounds us. To just sum it up, it's our atmosphere, which the air that envelopes our planet, the hydrosphere, which is fresh water, groundwater, oceans, the lithosphere, land, and biosphere, all living organisms and biodiversity on Earth. These domains give birth to the resources we utilize every day, and upon disposal, they should cyclically return back to their origin, which we know in this case today, it's not happening. The Paris Agreement recognizes the link between biodiversity and climate change, urging all of us to adopt a holistic strategy to overcome the challenges that we will face and we are facing. We cannot truly claim to understand the climate crisis without acknowledging its connection to biodiversity. Which brings me to the craft sector. Majority of the grassroots players within the Indian handmade and creative manufacturing sector are located across the length and breadth of the country, many of whom belong to the indigenous networks. They have shared an intrinsic and respectful relationship with nature over generations. The tradition of a localized production to consumption system in crafts alongside low carbon production, reliance on hand skills, makes this sector intrinsically green. But at this moment, I would like to probe that if we think of the pre-industrial societies, they seem to have an understanding of the balance they needed to maintain between their livelihood and immediate ecosystem. Maybe they recognized their dependency on this ecosystem for meeting their daily needs. They knew how to best conserve it. With economies of scale coming into play in the industrial capital of society, if we might call it, an imbalance got created. We can think of river pollution, groundwater scarcity, diminishing pasture lands, and deforestation. The craft sector, owing to its resource-dependent nature, regionally disparate and unorganized nature, is extremely vulnerable to the environmental and economic transitions. So against this background, we have set a three-point agenda. The first is to understand connection between ecology, communities, their traditional knowledge systems, and livelihood. Within this, we will touch upon land, water, and material components. The material, as you will gather as we move, we will speak about textiles which come from both plant-based as well as animal-based sources. The second point we will look at is craft's own struggle with keeping green in relation to the market dynamics. And the third is the role of civil society organizations, or CSOs, as some of you might call it, in building climate resilience. We bring to the panel today three speakers who are three thought leaders. They are change makers from different diverse Indian regions representing three different materials. These materials are backbone of globally celebrated textile traditions, however, with a distinct stamp. Pashmina, the epitome of luxury, Eri silk, known for its conscious craftsmanship, and Sanganer block prints tied with prolific production. Let me introduce our first panelist, Brij Ballabh. Brij Ballabh is he's a fifth generation Sanganer-based artisan and a national awardee for hand block printing and indigo dyeing. He's the director of the Crafts Council of Weavers and Artisans Jaipur and runs an NGO, Shilpi Sansthan, in Sanganer for sustainable economic development of hand block printing clusters. He was awarded Handicraft Excellence Award by World Craft Council in 2012 and 2014, when felicitated with a doctorate on cultivation of indigo for dyeing and printing on textiles in 2021. Brij Ballabh ji, आपका स्वागत है.
Namaste.
Namaste. The next panelist is Monisha Ahmed. She's joining us from Bombay today and is the co-founder of Ladakh Arts and Media Organization in Leh. She's an independent writer, anthropologist, researcher whose work focuses on art practices and material cultures of Ladakh. Textiles of the nomadic pastoralist of Changtang in eastern Ladakh was the subject of her doctoral degree from Oxford University, which later developed into a book, Living Fabric, Weaving Among the Nomads of Ladakh Himalayas. Welcome, Monisha.
Thank you.
And the last speaker of the day is Rituraj Dewan. He's the co-founder of Seven Weaves, an Assam-based social enterprise, and Seven Weaves Research Foundation. I'm lucky to have been to Seven Weaves, and the idea came from there because I was able to see the ecosystem, the regional ecosystem, which I'm going to introduce now. He works to create economic opportunities on the traditional knowledge systems of forest-dependent families of the Loharghat forest range in Assam. This belt is home to some of the world's most beautiful wild silks and natural dyes. Dewan is invested in ecosystem restoration and community connections while building a profitable business model for all stakeholders. Welcome, Rituraj.
Thank you so much.
So, Rituraj, I will start with you, and what I will do, to base a foundation to the conversation is that we will first talk about the bioregions, where you all are located. So, Rituraj, Seven Weaves, as I know, came to Loharghat Forest Range Belt in 2017, and it started a social environmental experiment, as you call it, which means that you employed crafts as a tool for conservation and community development. Why was this approach necessary? It's quite unique. So why was it necessary in this region? And I'll just take a second to share my screen. This is the Loharghat Forest Range. So over to you, Rituraj.
Oh, you have this picture. I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, and who had joined. Thank you, Mira. Thank you, the panelists. Surucchi, beautiful introduction for the whole theme. And yeah, it's nice, that we are speaking climate today. We are speaking about craft as a solution, hopefully, for the climate mitigation. And we are speaking about biodiversity as a component of the whole thing. But I think there are a few things which we really want to speak today in the beginning to set the context. Why actually 7 weeks? Why an organization? We started with an idea of creating an organization, and why we started working. The whole idea, as you said, and I think you were there also around 2018. You were there, and I'm very proud that that I'm speaking something which you have seen. So we came with an idea that that biodiversity is very important, right? Those days, just 5 years back, biodiversity was not very important. It was more something beautiful. It was not part of the human existence. So it was like biodiversity is very important. That biodiversity of this region has to be conserved. Now the problem was, how do we conserve this biodiversity, right? So we got a idea that let's go to the place where biodiversity is there, right? Where there is a rich biodiversity. So we choose a place which was a reserve forest. Like there is 3 reserve forests, and it is actually a forest range, the place where you came. And we started dialogue with the people who live there, the community who live in these villages, who are part of this forest range. And we went with a lot of ideas actually, that that these people, because of population, because of economic reasons, because of new changes in the economic way we live, or we approach life, are the problem for the forest, right? Because these are the people who are growing in numbers. These are the people who have different ideas of economy nowadays, and these are the people who are encroaching upon the forest and biodiversity. And anything you need to do, you have to take these people out of their dependency in the forest, right? With that idea from outside, we went and started conversation. We started an organization so that there is a platform to speak and start the whole thing. But as we were meeting people, taking baby steps, one at a time, trying to understand each house and things like that, and decided to start a small craft based on platform where people can start weaving, because weaving was a very common thing which people were doing there. So we felt that we start with that. We felt maybe that is the place where we start the conversation, and from here we will try to understand how we can build a organization which will give them economic opportunities. Because if you see 7 Waves logo, you can see we said the punchlines was opportunities bring equity. or opportunities bring equality. So we felt the opportunity was not there. That's the reason why these people will go and destroy the forest. And we need to create opportunities there to bring them to a situation where they understand what is what people have signed in Paris, or what the Montreal document says, like why it is important that to conserve biodiversity, because these are the people in the forefront of conservation or a biodiversity area. So all this when happening, so we started looking at their craft, which was Eri silk. We understood they know handloom, so we started with handloom centers, and we started bringing in a lot of scientists, a lot of designers, a lot of people who have a lot of exposures to craft and things like this to these people, and started working on the idea that we will create beautiful products with a lot of design inputs, a lot of process inputs, right? A lot of inputs from how like that can be taken to different parts of the world, and create a very important economic system within that community. And this is how the whole process will help us to bring this community out of the forest. But as we were progressing every month, we have set up the loom. Then we went to understand that what is the yarn which is being used, how the yarn is processed, from where we'll get the yarn, how this yarn is made, how the silk are reared, how the rearing takes place in each house, and and who are the people who are responsible for this, and then how this silkworm which is eating some leaves are getting their food. So we started going one step at a time, little deeper and deeper and deeper, and in the end we realized there are a lot of things what we thought we know is not there. Right? And it was something very different. I'll give you a small example. So I think on the 4th or 6th month, I decided that I'll start it because I surveyed the place. Means like our team surveyed the place. We are very small, people, group of people who actually were doing that. So we went to the village every alternate day, stayed there for 2-3 days, and then when we found out that there will be not enough eri silk, because every home do a very small quantity of eri.
Yeah.
Okay. And when we speak to them, why don't you do, grow it in a nice, way that, because they have land that, that there will be enough eri silk. So they were not, they are not very, attracted to, the things we were speaking. They didn't like the idea very much. They were very polite. So they said, yeah, maybe we can try, but nobody was doing. So on the 6th month, what I did, I went to a sericulture office. I bought the guy from the Central Silk Board, the scientist there, requested him to come to our place, and took a 1 acre of land, as a kind of a pilot, and put there a very scientific way to do castor plantation, because castor plantation is the beginning of silk production, because we need the leaf in good quantity if we want to increase the silk production, because the whole idea was to develop these villages into the successful economic model, right? So as I was doing, I bought the tractor, I was plowing the land. So there was one guy who was put 24 hours to, do everything. So we started, fencing the place with bamboos. We did a lot of, we spent good amount of money. We had, no problem of getting, scientists and other people, to help us. I think on the 3rd or 4th day, the person, who helped us to start that loom unit in his courtyard, which he visited, Surucchi, he called me for a tea in the evening, and he said, Rituraj, I heard you have started plantation of eri. I said, yeah, I want to do this because I want to show it to the people how eri should be planted, this era should be planted, the castor should be planted, and how we can actually scientifically increase the production of the whole thing. Then he said, that's fine, you are doing a very good job, but do you know, you are doing a sin. Aap ek paap kar rahe ho. Tumi eta paap kori aso. I got why this man said suddenly that that what I am doing is a paap. Is something a sin which I am trying to do. Then I said, why you think I'm doing a sin? He said, no, you can't grow eri this way, right? In our village, you cannot grow eri. Eri has to grow naturally, right? And the process of growing eri, if you want to, grow eri, it is different. You cannot, take, eri in your hand and then start dropping it in the fields.
Yeah.
Right. So that actually, that evening, I try to understand actually what is that? right? Then I started questioning, many other, airy breeders who are, successfully breeding airy, and they are doing it for a very long time. Like, how do you actually grow your airy? Because I have seen airy in your orchards, right? What is the process? And I realized that the whole system, what actually, is very scientific, right? Very economical and very productive, is a very wrong way according to the villagers.
Yeah.
Right? So this is when actually, we brought an ecologist to our team. So 3 ecologists, came and joined, like, one after another. So one was put into place to understand, like, that what is actually the process. So a socio-ecologist joined us, and we started, mapping the whole processes of, socio-ecology, the socio-ecology perspective of the entire material used in the community. Everything, right from airy silk to bamboo, everything, whatever material they are using, we have started, questioning everything and started, documenting it. Then we brought in a, like, orienthologist, right, to understand, see, how the biodiversity is there, and how the biodiversity impact, can be understood from their, conversations and things like that. And then we also brought in an ecologist with the idea that, let's work on the idea of silk and understand, how the whole thing is moving, right? And so, like, within a year or so, right, by 2018 and, early 2019, we realized that the cultural ethos, because we mapped everything, we started plotting everything in a piece of paper, the cultural ethos of these, these communities,
Yeah.
and the, biodiversity conservation, if you, put it on the other page, right, are nothing but same, right? And we realized that, that culture and ecology is nothing, like, they are inseparable. They are one or the other, right?
They are the way of life, of course.
That's a way of life, right? And we realize that, that there is a word, which is actually, which we cannot use because it has been used by somebody and trademarked it by an Italian company, which is bioculture. So it is actually, it is the idea of bioculture, right? And now when we realize, like, what is this and what is, what is this, then we realize that the whole, way of producing airy, right, is like, on the idea of exclusion. And what is exclusion? Exclusion is something that, there is tomorrow. It's not like there is no tomorrow. Exclusion is that I will not use everything today. I will keep it for some, tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
When I say what is exclusion in the culture, in terms of conservation, it is the definition of conservation. Conservation is not, like creating a museum. Conservation is in a dynamic space where, you will use the material, but you will make sure that, you can keep on using the material because there is a time which is allowed to regrow it.
Yeah. So
Then
with that thought, Rituraj, that's a very good thought that, we use it mindfully and
Yes.
we use it that there is enough for tomorrow.
Yes.
So there is this idea of continuity, which brings me to Monisha. Monisha, my next question is to you, and I would like to cite responsible wool standard that Textile Exchange brought out in 2016, and it's effective from 2016. It states that animal care, land management, and biodiversity protection are criteria that should be regarded for any producer of wool for sustainable production. Changtang region in eastern Ladakh, it follows the indigenous methods of Pashmina goat breeding and care. Can we attempt to understand livestock holding, their cultural relevance, and production of the Pashmina fiber against this framework?
Yeah, thank you, Surucchi. I hope I can be heard. And thank you, Meera, and thank you to everyone on Creative Dignity for inviting me to speak this evening. I think it's, like Rituraj, I think it's very important and good to have these discussions and sharing, and also to bring in people from different parts of the country to, share and to learn from each other. I'd like to also state from the start that I'm not a practitioner. I'm not somebody who's actually practicing in the field of Pashmina. My work has more been research based over the last 35 years in Ladakh, and with the Changpas who live mainly in the eastern part of the region. I just wanted to actually begin by also sort of taking off where Rituraj sort of ended, looking at this sort of, to use the word bioculture, but to also look at this sort of overlaps and interconnections between your biodiversity, your communities, you know, and your culture, and actually to say in a way that the breeding of the Pashmina goat, the way it is happening today on the Changthang, has kind of disrupted this. So I will just take you back a little bit, you know, in history to look at the eastern part of Ladakh, and say that actually in Changthang, so Changthang is a really vast area. It stretches over 1,600 kilometers. The part that's in Ladakh is the westernmost part, but it stretches right across Tibet and almost, you know, touches or Tibet-occupied China, and almost touches you know, sort of the eastern bit of China. So it is really this really vast area. And historically, till about 1959, before the Chinese occupied Tibet, a lot of the Pashmina was bred in Western Tibet. And Ladakh was mainly the conduit for the trade. So this trade had been happening for over 500-600 years. There are trade treaties that were signed between Tibet, Ladakh, and Kashmir that said that, you know, the trade route would be via, the Pashmina would come from Western Tibet and go through Ladakh and then on to Kashmir. And anybody who diverted this trade, it was punishable even by death. The British, you know, obviously because of the East India Company and looking always at economic benefits, were always trying to break into this trade route, but they never really succeeded successfully. It was also the reason why the sort of ruler of Jammu, what was his name? Gulab Singh sent his general Zorawar Singh to conquer Ladakh and then Tibet, because he wanted to control this trade in Pashmina. So the trade in Pashmina has a very long, complicated, not only economic, but also political history. In 1959, when the Chinese entered Tibet, a lot of the Tibetans who bred the Pashmina goat in Western Tibet literally sort of walked over the border with their animals and started to settle in the eastern part of Ladakh. At the same time, in Ladakh, there was suddenly, especially from Kashmir, because now the border had closed, cross-border trade had stopped, the Kashmiris started turning to the Changpas in eastern Ladakh for Pashmina. And suddenly the price of Pashmina, which was before 1959, the price of Pashmina was even less than wool in Ladakh. But suddenly the price of Pashmina started going up. And what is really interesting is that Ladakh produces the best Pashmina in the world.
Yeah.
And you measure Pashmina by the smaller micron and the longer staple length. But it only produces 1% of world production. A country like Mongolia has 40% of world production. So it's a very, very small percentage of production. So what's been happening over the last at least 20 or 30 years, through government efforts, through private efforts, people have been trying to increase the number of goats. So whereas when I first started working in Changthang in the early 90s, it was 3 sheep for every goat. Today, it's 3 goats for every sheep. And this has really affected the sort of the biodiversity of Changthang. And I think, you know, that a little bit of that will come in your second question that you sent. But just to say that I think, you know, to understand when you're talking about climate change, or you're talking about livestock, or you're talking about communities and breeding of animals, we need to also look back and understand history. We need to understand, you know, what has happened on the Changthang. How have historic events impacted the livestock that is bred here? And you know, Changthang is an area that it's sort of like a very high altitude arid desert. it's above the tree line, so we don't have trees growing, but we have a lot of very hardy varieties of grasses, shrubs and herbs that grow here. They have a lot of nutritional value for the animals. There are also 3 major lakes in this area. You have Pangong, which is very widely known and popular. Then you have Tsokar and Somoriri. These are also Ramsar sites where, and they're breeding grounds for things, for animals, birds like the black-necked crane or the bar-headed goose. So it is a very varied landscape. And apart from sheep and goats, you also have yaks over here, and you also have horses. So I think for as long as probably the nomadic pastoralists have been living here, they have been they have certain rules and regulations that this is summer pasture, this is winter pasture. The yaks and the horses are always taken to higher pasture, while the sheep and goats are always kept with the people, the nomads who live with their tents, because they have to be milked every day. And the yaks and horses can be taken higher up. So that's how pasture is also divided. What's interesting is that in 1980, the government actually declared Changtang a wildlife sanctuary. And the whole idea behind this was to remove the humans from this area. Of course, it hasn't happened. It probably never will happen, because you have to understand that, humans, animals, wildlife, and all, they coexist together. And there is a reciprocal relationship between all this. So I think, that is important to understand.
Thank you, Monisha. That really helps understanding the landscape. And I have shared 2 pictures, for people to just imagine the location and geography that Monisha is talking about, which brings me to Brij Ballabh Udaiwal ji. Brij Ballabh ji, यहाँ एक कोशिश करते हैं. मेरा सवाल आपसे ये है समझने का कि जो सांगानेरी ब्लॉक प्रिंटिंग की जेनरेशनल कला है, वो भारत और विश्व में प्रसिद्ध तो है, बट ये सांगानेर के पानी और कारीगरी का क्या अनोखा तालमेल है जो इसको देश और विदेश भर में प्रशंसा भी दिलाता है और बाजार की मांग भी बरकरार रखता है?
धन्यवाद कि आपने इस तरह के इश्यू को उठाने के लिए प्रयास किया है. मुझे खुशी होगी आपके प्रश्नों का जवाब देते हुए. जैसा कि सांगानेर के कुशल खरावदी कारीगर जटिल डिजाइनों को लकड़ी के ब्लॉकों पर उकेरते हैं और छपाई के कारीगर वस्त्रों पर इनका उपयोग कर सुंदर पैटर्न बनाने के लिए पारंपरिक तकनीकों का उपयोग करते हैं. इस प्रक्रिया में कपड़े पर छापों की छाप लगाना शामिल है, जिसमें परिणाम स्वरूप खूबसूरती से किए गए वस्त्र तैयार होते हैं, जिसमें दशकों पूर्व प्राकृतिक रंगों का इनमें प्रयोग होता था, जो इसकी विशिष्टता थी. परंतु आज बहुत कुछ बदला है, और इस बदलाव में हमने परंपराओं को बहुत 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 दूर छोड़ दिया है, और आज 99% काम जो है वो आज इको फ्रेंडली सिंथेटिक डाइज से होता है, या कुछ हद तक नुकसान पहुंचाने वाले रासायनिक रंगों से भी होता है. तो मतलब परिवर्तन इतना हैंड ब्लॉक प्रिंटिंग में भी आ चुका है कि हमने अपने मोटिव्स और परंपराओं को दूर रखते हुए, शॉर्टकट्स को अपनाते हुए, पर्यावरण मित्र होने का दिखावा करते हुए हम दुनिया में अपने आप को प्रदर्शित करते हैं कि हम सस्टेनेबल हैं, लेकिन वास्तविकताओं से दूर हैं. जी,
बहुत सटीक बात करी आपने ब्रिज बल्लभ जी. और मैं ऋतुराज, आई विल वांट टू कम टू यू अगेन and try to understand, there were these changes in the ecosystem that you were talking about in the last answer that you were giving, and you were coming to there. Now, when we had a conversation, you said that Surucchi, the last time you came, and so it's been like 4 years in between, and there have been many transitions in the Loharghat forest range, and they are both climate driven and economic driven. It'll be very interesting to understand specifically in the Eri silk ecosystem and the Muga silk. So, they are produced differently. And so if you can just take us and help us understand has the rise in temperature kind of impacted their cultivation, their farming in any way?
There is a lot of new things which are coming up in last 4 years after like we started the project, right? In fact, in last 2 years, what we have seen, if you see the temperature of this area, right? Say last 2 years, especially last 2 years, we have seen like that say 36, 37, 38 degrees centigrade, and the normal was like for 2 days you have 36, 37, and there is rain. Again, the temperature will go down, and then again, there will be again the sunrise, and then the temperature is there. But nowadays, what happens, the change in temperature is like that 36, 37, 38, 39, 40. It's continued for say 15 days, 20 days, right? And then rain will come, and it will continue for something like 6 days, 8 days. What is the difference which we are having in Erie? Erie being domestic, the the outcomes are not that great, like that. But still, what we have seen, that people are not able to have say 4 cycles, because one rearer normally have 4 cycles in a year, 4 to 5 cycles. 5 is like very good. 4 is something which they normally do. That is the kind of thing which Erie rearers normally have in a year. Like so 5 commercial cycles in a year, and of which 4 will be like ensured. Nowadays, what has happened? All these cycles which start normally from say April until September are lost. Right, somewhere like the Erie will grow for say from the small larva to the big one where they start producing cocoon, but stop. They will not produce cocoon. They will stop there and they will die. Sometimes the eggs will not hatch. So there are a lot of cycle loss in the last 2 years in this region, and not only in our area but across the region. Because when things were not working in our area, we thought we can bring things from outside and and we keep the cycles grow. But we could not do it because there was no availability of eggs. There was no availability of lot of things. So this is one thing which we have seen in last 2-3 years. 2 years, like very very well documented. And for Muga, there is a big problem. So what has happened? There is some plantation things which have started coming inside our forest. I think you will have more such news, because Government of India has given some 11,000 crores or 2,000 crores. I don't know the number. For development of palm cultivation in our area, okay, in Northeast. So there is a special scheme now that you can start getting money from the government if you start doing this, right? And there are a lot of other good money which is coming in if you start monoculture. So what has happened? If you remember, so say like you came to a place where there were a lot of empty lands within the forest ecosystem, and these, I told you, these empty lands are not empty lands, because when we started asking, because we also had the idea that why don't we start agriculture there? Why don't we increase the Muga trees into those things? We realized that no land in that ecosystem was free. So all the lands were designated and given some work, right? So these were grazing lands which were there. Now those grazing lands has been converted into banana cultivation. So we were very happy actually in the beginning, because that people are doing some economic activity, more money will come to the village, and then there will be less reliant on many things. But as we were understanding the monoculture thing, we realized the monoculture is heavily dependent on inputs. So there are a lot of fertilizers, chemical fertilizers which are used, a lot of chemical which are used for the whole to maintain the whole cycle of production, and this is now directly impacting the Muga cultivation. In fact, yesterday I had a meeting with a very old Muga rearer who is rearing Muga for last 40 years. He said this time I will not do it because last year he felt that that it will not work. It didn't work, and this time he said no, I don't have the courage anymore to start do Muga, so I have left Muga. So this is a very 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 grim situation, because if we are not able to do Muga here, right, or Erie here, there will be a lot of problem in the entire Muga thing. So this is like a climate driven problem, which was the change in the temperature, change in the rainfall, and secondly what we have seen, the economic induced problem is also there, which is actually changing the whole ecosystem.
Can I just take a moment here? And Meera, if that's okay, there is a video that I have, which shows the Muga silk trees, the Muga trees, the worms rearing on it, and there is a banana plantation next to it, right? That's the recent. Is
Yes.
it okay?
So, Suruchi, it would be very nice for all of us to see it, but I think we're running out of time, and let's hear the other
Okay.
panelists, and then
Yeah.
maybe at the end, those who stay back and are interested, we can play it.
Sure, sure. So, Monisha, I will come to you now and, just trying to understand that in the last answer, while we were talking about herd management. So, how has herd management changed in the last decade, and what impact will that have on the ecological balance of the region?
Thanks, Suruchi. I just wanted to also just sort of come back a little bit what I was saying earlier. So I think the Changpas of Ladakh primarily were a wool-based culture. They reared sheep and yaks, and they used the fiber from these animals. The women primarily wove with wool, that whether it was from the sheep or the yak, and the men were weaving with hair from the goat and the yak. There was very little pashmina in this area, and whatever little pashmina they did have, they were sort of mainly trading with some traders that would come over from Himachal. It was the Changpas from Western Tibet who really controlled this trade in pashmina, and they had the large numbers of pashmina goats in their flocks, which went up to 600, 800, and not in the Ladakhi part of Changthang. In fact, it's very interesting because the Ladakhis, when they look at their livestock, it is like almost that they're visualizing the Ladakhi pantheon in the livestock. So they have that kind of affinity with their animals. So the Ladakhi pantheon is divided into three. You have the gods who live at the top, you have the spirits of the sort of water and the earth that live at the bottom, and you have the humans and the demons who live in the center. And this is represented amongst their livestock. But it was primarily represented by the sheep, the yak, and the horses. It was never the goats. In fact, goats were sacrificed in Ladakh. We have sort of historical oral references that people have left us, or even images from the 1940s and the 50s of goat skins being used in rituals. And these are all references, we are told, to goat sacrifice that was practiced in the region and was practiced in Changthang. So goats were not a very sort of, if you put animals on a scale, goats were sort of on the lowest scale. But now with this sort of increase in the value, more the economic value of pashmina, goats have sort of become all the rage now, and and people are continuously increasing the number of goats in their flocks. Government schemes are encouraging this. Government schemes are also encouraging the people to have more white goats, because the white colored fiber is easier to dye, and they are giving white, they're breeding white goats, and then they're giving them out amongst the nomads for breeding. But then we are losing the natural colors that were there, which was gray and beige and brown, and predominantly we're now turning to white. So I think these are some of the sort of changes that are taking place in amongst the Changpas in terms of livestock rearing, keeping the number of animals and the goats, and this is going to have an impact. For instance, we know that goats, when they eat, they eat from the roots. They don't, not like sheep who just nibble on the top, right? So that definitely has an impact of desertification. It's not been studied in Ladakh. It has been studied in Western Tibet, but we're talking about a much larger expanse of land when we are talking about Western Tibet compared to what we are talking about when we talk about Ladakh. Also, the Ladakhi Changpas would also go on very long trading journeys. They would go, to Western Tibet. They would go to Himachal. They would go to Zanskar. So their livestock was not always in Ladakh. So they were eating pasture in other areas as they went along. Now, with sort of borders being enforced, this isn't done anymore. And then at the same time, you had the Tibetan refugees coming in. So there's been a lot of pasture, disparity, a lot of pressure on pasture. And these are kind of studies that nobody has really done. Especially looking at the impact of Tibetan refugees that have come into the region. Yeah.
Yeah. ब्रिज बल्लभ जी, मैं आपके पास आती हूँ इसके बाद, और ये समझने की कोशिश करते हैं कि सांगानेर की जो एरिया है, जो पूरा क्लस्टर है, उसमें तकरीबन 3,000 कारखाने हैं जो रंगाई छपाई और धुलाई का काम करते हैं, और ये मशीन से करते हैं, स्क्रीन प्रिंटिंग से करते हैं, और 1,000 कारखाने हैं जो हाथ से काम करते हैं। किस तरह की डाइस की आप बात कर रहे थे, और मेरा जो आपसे इम्पोर्टेंट सवाल है वो ये है कि इनको जो डाइज हैं, जो केमिकल वेस्ट है या वाटर है, इनको डिस्पोज करने की क्या सुविधा उपलब्ध है वहां पे?
देखिए, पहली चीज तो कि ये सभी यूनिट्स सांगानेर में जो कि रंगाई छपाई धुलाई और कागज से संबंध रखती है। आपको बताऊं कि छपाई के अतिरिक्त कागज का भी यहाँ पर बहुत बड़ा उद्योग है, जो कार्डबोर्ड और हैंडमेड पेपर के नाम पर जाना जाता है।
अच्छा।
ये फैक्ट्रियां बिना परमिशन के चलती है, और पोल्यूशन कंट्रोल बोर्ड ने इनके संचालकों को नोटिस जारी किए हुए हैं इनके क्लोजर के। रीको ने छपाई के यूनिट्स के लिए एक जगह रिजर्व की है जिसको छितरौली इंडस्ट्रियल एरिया बोला जाता है, और ये 15-17 साल से ये जगह रिजर्व की हुई है। लेकिन सांगानेर की रंगाई छपाई धुलाई यूनिट्स के द्वारा वहां पर जाने के लिए तैयार नहीं होने के कारण इनके लिए एक सीईटीपी की व्यवस्था की गई यहीं पर सांगानेर के मुहाना क्षेत्र में। लेकिन उद्यमियों की अकर्मण्यता, प्रशासनिक अनदेखी और सरकारी वोट बैंक की राजनीति के चलते कोई भी प्रयास सार्थक सिद्ध नहीं होने से सब कुछ यथावत और स्थिर है। प्रत्येक उद्यमी खुद की सामाजिक जिम्मेदारियों से बच रहा है। मतलब कुल मिला के सभी कुओं में भांग घुली हुई है। वहां पर जो रहने वाले लोग हैं वो भी वैसे ही हैं, उद्यमी भी वैसे ही हैं, सरकार भी वैसी ही है, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन भी वैसा ही है। सब कुछ खिचड़ी बना हुआ है, और हॉस्पिटल्स के मजे हो रहे हैं। जी
ये कहाँ जाता है पानी?
देखिए, 47 किलोमीटर का रिवर फ्रंट है। उस रिवर फ्रंट को सांगानेर पर आने से 3 तरफ इसका पानी जाता है। एक है चंदलाई बांध की तरफ, एक गोनेर बांध की तरफ, मोरेल बांध के लिए, और एक जाता है नेवटा बांध की तरफ। तो मतलब कभी यहाँ से वानस्पतिक रंगों से किए हुए धुलाई के पानी के लिए तीनों क्षेत्र में झगड़ा होता था कि हम ये पानी लेंगे, क्योंकि वानस्पतिक रंगों के पानी से इनको बहुत फायदे मिलते थे खेती में। फायदे आज भी मिल रहे हैं, लेकिन पहले अमृत मिलता था, आज जहर मिल रहा है। और वही जहर शहर वासियों को सब्जियों के रूप में और अनाज के रूप में खाने को मजबूर होना पड़ गया है, और सभी जिम्मेदार अपनी जिम्मेदारियों से विमुख है। जी
मैं यहाँ पे एक मोमेंट लेना चाहूंगी और मैं बताना चाहूंगी जो हमें सुन रहे हैं कि ये काफी सारी साइंटिफिक स्टडीज हो गई हैं इस बात पे कि सांगानेरी एरिया में जो वाटर डिस्पोज हो रहा है उससे प्रॉब्लम्स क्या हैं। ये जो वाटर वेस्ट है, ये एफ्लुएंट्स हैं जो टेक्सटाइल डाइंग और प्रिंटिंग इंडस्ट्री से आती हैं। इनमें डाइज हैं, ब्लीचिंग एजेंट्स हैं, सॉल्ट्स हैं, एसिड्स और हैवी मेटल्स हैं, जैसे क्रोमियम, कॉपर, लेड। ये डिस्चार्ज होते हैं अमानी शाह नाला, राइट?
जी
ब्रिजबलिश, हाँ। और ये जो है, ये जो टॉक्सिन्स हैं, ये क्रॉप्स में जाते हैं, प्लांट्स में जाते हैं, यही पानी एग्रीकल्चरल यूज में आता है, और यही जो सब्जियां उग रही हैं उसमें यही आसपास के लोग खाते हैं। आई ऑल्सो स्पोक टू अ साइंटिस्ट इन द लास्ट वीक एंड शी टोल्ड मी दैट इट इज बिकमिंग वेरी डिफिकल्ट। जैसे आप हॉस्पिटल की बात कर रहे थे, तो इस पॉइंट पे बहुत डिफिकल्ट है क्लासिफाई करना। कुछ ऐसी नई नई डिजीजेस भी आ रही हैं, जैसे बच्चों के बाल जल्दी ग्रे हो रहे हैं या उनके दांत जल्दी टूट रहे हैं। इस तरह की जो पीएच बैलेंस है सॉइल का, वो बिगड़ चुका है। तो इस पे हम वापस आएंगे ब्रिज बल्लभ जी, क्योंकि आपने सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी की बात करी थी। Rituraj, coming back to you, and I know that there is a Seven Weaves Research Center that you are also invested in and you're also running. you said that, throughout the work that you've done at Seven Weaves, you've engaged with climate experts, scientists, designers. But for this particular project, you said that you are trying to create an evidence-based approach to biodiversity mapping. Now, why is this needed? Can you give us one example or one data point, and preferably craft-based, that will help us achieve that? What is the tangible result that this kind of research will lead to?
There are two reasons why we are doing it. See, we also come from outside, right? So we also come with that disbelief that traditional system work, right? And we also come with that idea that that there is no traditional system. These are Anpar Gawa tribal people. Maybe we but since I was put outside from that thing for a long time and roam around, so I also have that same belief that I know everything that which they don't know, that there is no science behind it. So the whole idea in the beginning was because we were surprised with new things and which looks more promising than what we thought. So we started putting in ideas to put them in that perspective which people say is science. So we started with that idea. That's why the research wing came, and we started mapping. So our research was mostly mapping. That is all science. Mapping is science. Then later on, we realized that we have a material which is very beautiful, right? Which is the craft, which is the thing. Now, when we want to put that material to the highest market in the world, we realize suddenly the world also asks for this kind of measurements, right? Like, see, we have Airy Silk. Now tomorrow, if Airy Silk, our Airy Silk will be used by, say, a company X, who has promised to go net zero by 2030, because all of these companies have said they will go for net zero by 2030. They will try to understand what is my material, and how this material is related to their climate change goals, right? So for all these things, we need very strong measurement tools, right? Luckily, our system which we try to do has become very valuable asset for us, right? So we have a three kind of system right now in place. One, to study the material, right? The second is study the interactions. Like if you see ESG, what ESG is, it's environmental social goals, right? So we are actually conforming to all these requirements. Our idea of understanding the material, recording it in a way which science says science, is one part of the whole thing. Secondly, we are trying to understand the whole social aspect of the craft, how the whole craft is being, because Brij Ballabh bhai ne jo bola hai, हम craft बोल देते हैं, उसको सोचते हैं सब solve हो गया, नहीं craft ही problem है. Like craft को अगर आपने कुछ भी change कर दिया तो change हो गया है. Bringing in mill spun, yarn which is dyed with all these beautiful chemicals, giving us very vibrant colors, is a problem. So how all this is one. And second, third thing is the assessment of the biodiversity. Like how the biodiversity is actually performing when you are trying to continue this is something which we are trying to do. So these three aspects we have. So we have three different labs. One is the silk lab. The other is the, we call TEK lab, traditional ecological knowledge lab. And the third is the lab where we have indicator species to assess biodiversity. So three labs we are running. And this is giving us all the ammunitions, right, for conforming to the requirement of the world. Like if somebody is saying net zero is the requirement, we can say, okay, this is the material which will conform to your net zero requirement. In fact, it is a net negative material.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
ब्रिज बल्लभ जी, मैं यहाँ पे आपसे एक और सवाल करना चाहूंगी, क्योंकि हम डाइस की बात कर रहे हैं, हम ये बात कर रहे हैं कि एक्चुअली सोशल इम्पैक्ट इसका क्या है, और आपने सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी की बात करी थी हमारे लास्ट आंसर में. तो ये जो सांगानेर तहसील के जो रंगाई छिपाई कारखाने हैं, इनके मालिक हैं, ये समझते हैं कि इनसे काम करने से उनकी भी हेल्थ पे बुरा असर पड़ा है, जो उनके आर्टिजान भाई हैं, और जो पब्लिक हेल्थ है, जैसे हमने लास्ट में बात करी, उनके भी हेल्थ पे बहुत ज्यादा असर पड़ा है.
जैसा कि मैंने पूर्व में आपको बताया कि कपड़ा रंगाई छपाई एवं धुलाई के साथ ही सांगानेर तहसील में कागज उद्योग निश्चित तौर पर एक पर्यावरणीय खतरा है, इकोलॉजिकल खतरा है एनवायरनमेंट के लिए, जिनको विकसित देशों में बंद किया जा चुका है. जो भी डेवलप कंट्रीज है उन्होंने टेक्सटाइल्स और पेपर जैसे उद्योगों को बंद कर चुके हैं, और आने वाले समय में विकासशील देश भी जब विकसित होने की तरफ बढ़ेंगे, जैसे हम बात करते हैं हम कब विकसित होंगे तो हम भी बंद कर देंगे, तो ऐसे में उक्त उद्योगों पर आधारित कारीगरों की आजीविका पर तो कुछ बुरा असर पड़ेगा ही पड़ेगा, क्योंकि जब उद्योग ही बंद कर दिए जाएंगे तो वो जो काम करने वाले लोग हैं उनको काम कहाँ से मिलेगा, जिसका असर नीचे एक समाचार में कहीं पर मैंने दिखाने का प्रयास किया था। यहाँ पर मैं आपको साफ साफ बताना चाहता हूं कि सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी के नाम पर हम लोग जिम्मेदारियों को ना तो उद्यमी समझता है, ना उसका व्यापार करने वाले लोग समझते हैं, ना कोई मिडलमैन समझते हैं, ना ही जो कामगर लोग हैं, कारीगर लोग हैं, वो समझते हैं कि उद्यमियों की कोई सोशल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी भी होती है। यहाँ पर सीधा सीधा ये मानव अधिकारों के साथ खिलवाड़ का मामला है। अब यहाँ पर जब तक जो खिलवाड़ कर रहा है और जिसके साथ खिलवाड़ हो रहा है, दोनों जब तक नहीं समझेंगे या हम उनको नहीं समझाएंगे, तो शायद ऐसा ही सब कुछ निरंतर जारी रहेगा। शायद आप जैसे ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस इनको समझाने के लिए प्रयास कर सकते हैं, ऐसा मेरा मानना है जी।
So we are talking about both environmental health, यहाँ पे environmental health की बात कर रहे हैं, public health की बात कर रहे हैं, and we are talking about both planet and we are talking about people. And Monisha, my next question is to you, and it is to understand that you also, when we were discussing and we were trying to base this conversation, you mentioned that out migration is a big issue right now, where Changpas are going towards Leh, and this is not only because of the climatic change, it's also because of the facilities that will be available to them. Now they are employing external manpower to kind of take care of this ecosystem, which earlier they were taking care, even if it was 50 years. How will this affect the future sustainability of the Pashmina fiber coming from Ladakh?
Well, it's not just Pashmina fiber. It's just a way of life also. I mean, these are, a large part of Changthang is populated by nomadic pastoralists. They are people who live in yak tents. They do have, sometimes in winter they live in homes that they have built, but they have been moving with their livestock. And one of the reasons that you have such good Pashmina from these areas is because of the wind chill factor and the fact that they keep the animals moving. Even when they camp at night or when they live in their tents, they do not put the animals in a pen, because they say that, when they're in a cramped place, then, urine gets on the fiber or feces gets on the fiber. So it spoils it. So they've always have this idea of, being out in the open and roaming, but it's a very hard way of life, and today, when the younger generation sees that hard way of life, there are no facilities, there are no toilets, there's no bathing facility. There used to be mobile schools in the 90s, which were actually doing well, but the government stopped that and they introduced boarding schools in the area. So when you have boarding schools, you're taking children away from their parents. So they are not living, they're not learning about the nomadic sort of way of life, as they live with their parents, and so there's a lot of this kind of, on the one hand, you have the older generation that is, saying that, we are not going to leave the Changthang, this is where we were born, this is where we are living. And then you have a younger generation that is saying, no, it's very hard to live out there. We can't keep herding animals. What is the revenue that we are earning? Then you have, the army that is also widely, have their sort of posts out in the Changthang. They employ a lot of people on a daily wage labor. So a lot of the Changpa are now going to do that rather than herding. They would rather go and work for the army, whether it's, working on the road or working in their kitchens or whatever, and earn cash, which at the end of the day, they can say, I have earned this much, or in the end of the month, right? Then a lot of Changpas are also, as more and more of these areas are open for tourism, a lot of Changpas are then going into tourist-related activities. So, you have, just now, a lot of the Changpa camps where before people used to jointly herd their livestock, or a lot of the times it used to be the younger generation, children, not children, but, young adults who would herd the livestock. Now the elderly are herding livestock. So it's getting very, very difficult for them. So they are beginning to hire labor, sometimes from other villages, sometimes from amongst the Nepali population that has now, come into Ladakh, and, a lot of they are, sort of they do a lot of these jobs, whether it's hotels, guest houses, but also herding livestock. So we're beginning to see, some of these sort of dynamics change, and also when the nomads migrate out, some of them, so they have a rule in Changthang that if you are leaving your village or your nomadic community, but if you still want to come back and you want to share the resources, you have to continue to pay the taxes. So these taxes may be in kind, they may actually be in cash, or they may be obligations that you have to fulfill as a member of the community. A lot of the early Changpas that migrated from their communities in let's say in the 80s or the 90s, they kind of cut themselves off. And then later on, they saw that they wanted to go back, and they didn't have an entryway back because the community said, okay, you stopped doing thal. It's called tax is called thal. The younger now the families, as they are moving out, they are all still keeping links. They will all continue to keep a link in Changthang. Because they don't want to cut themselves off from the community, and also because they're not quite sure. They still see economic benefits, right? Especially from Pashmina. 1 kilo or 2 kilos of Pashmina, they sell it by the bati, is selling now for like 6,000, 7,000 rupees. So they do see these economic benefits. So they are not cutting themselves off from their community. And actually, a lot of them go in the summer to work there, whether it's herding sometimes or it's running tea stalls for the tourists, and they come back to lay in the winter. So there is now a kind of like a reciprocal relationship that's happening between the Changpas who live in Leh and the ones who still live in Changthang.
So in your opinion, Monisha, what strategies can be pursued to ensure sustainable development in the Changthang region to promote well-being of Changpa, considering this unique bio-cultural context that you spoke about?
I think, sort of a very basic thing is the quality of life.
Yeah.
How can you improve a quality of life? If you're still sitting in a tent with one small kerosene lamp, it is a very harsh and challenging, way of life. And especially in winter, when the temperatures fall to -20, there have been blizzards in Changthang, whole livestock, have been sometimes wiped out, sheep and goats. I think I was telling you earlier also that, when you have this, imbalance in the number of sheep and goats, and when winter sets in, actually the goats sleep in the middle, and the sheep sleep around them. So the warmth of the sheep keeps the goats warm. But we saw in the last blizzard that a number of goats died because the sheep population has fallen. So they don't have that warmth at night anymore. So these are, little things that, we don't really think of all the time, but sometimes we do need to take into consideration. We also have a lot of fencing that has now happened in the Changthang, whether it's by the army or government, agencies. And that prevents the kyang, which is the wild ass, from running across the Changthang. And actually, it is the kyang that fertilizes the Changthang, because they run vast distances. But now you have fencing that has come up in various parts of Changthang, and, you have kyang standing there staring at a fence that, they can't go past anymore.
Yeah.
So we're going to begin to see biodiversity being affected. On one hand, you have the government talking about, how they are really, all out to increase Pashmina production in Ladakh and do whatever they can. But they have plans for setting up a solar power plant on 2,000 acres of pasture land. Yeah. So, isn't anybody, thinking about these things? They were also going to bring the train through Changthang and actually have, once some of the station stops along the way, which is what the animals use for grazing. So, there's a lot of, it's almost like, the government's development policies and projects are working against themselves, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't work together. And I think there has to be a focus on wool. You can't have an economy that is only focused on pashmina. Otherwise, and it's, when I say wool, it's not just I don't just mean weaving with wool and making woolen products and all that, but I mean a whole culture that was based around wool and animal hair. So, and goat hair, yak hair was widely used in Changtang, but only by men. But now we see less and less men weaving. We see less and less yak hair tents. Everybody's now living in a white canvas tent. So these are also skills and art and practices that are dying out. In 50 years from now, if there are no tents left on the Changtang, you only have these white canvas tents, but it is the brown yak tent that keeps people warm.
Yeah.
So a shelter that provides protection from the rain. So these are kind of some of the changes that we're beginning to see. Yeah.
No, definitely, I think the way the conversation has moved, there is definitely a consensus, though I think we've opened a Pandora box and there are multiple directions, we can run in. But economic development has to be envisioned in sync with strong ecological conservation goals. And Meera, before I hand it over to Meera to give her closing remarks, Meera, आपसे एक सवाल है, ब्रिज बल्लभ जी, कि एज अ सिविल सोसाइटी मेंबर आपका खुद का संस्थान है, आप क्राफ्ट्स काउंसिल ऑफ वीवर्स एंड आर्टिसांस के आप हेड हैं, और इतने आप खुद ने आपने यहाँ पे एक काम बदला है अपना, कि आप इंडिगो से ही काम कर रहे हैं और नेचुरल डाई से ही कर रहे हैं, और ऐसा देखा देखी में अभी कम है वहाँ पे। तो ये आपके भाइयों के जो आपका जो क्लस्टर में जो आप लोगों का कम्युनिटी है, उसमें ये बात होती है कि क्या समाधान हो सकती है इस समस्या की, जो आप लोग इस पे एक्ट कर पाए अपनी तरफ से।
जी हाँ, बिल्कुल, बहुत ही मार्मिक प्रश्न है कि समाधान क्या हो सकता है। समाधान तब होता है, या यूं कहिए कि समाधान है, लेकिन समाधान तब निकलता है जब हमारे मन में समाधान को अपनाने की इच्छा होती है। आज मुश्किल ये है कि इस समाधान को निकालने के लिए इच्छा मर चुकी है। उस इच्छा को जागृत करने के लिए CCWA के माध्यम से प्रयासरत है, शिल्पी संस्थान के माध्यम से प्रयासरत है। और जो आज सस्टेनेबिलिटी एक जो बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है हमारे सामने, और क्लाइमेट लेवल आने के बाद तो अब हम यूरोपियन यूनियन में 2024 में या इस वर्ष हम फ्रांस में अपने सामान नहीं भेज पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि ट्रेसेबिलिटी और लाइफ साइकिल एनालिसिस, यानी आपको इतने कंप्लायंसेस की जरूरत पड़ने लग गई है कि अब आपकी इच्छा पर आधारित नहीं है, अब आपको बदलना ही पड़ेगा। सिर्फ एक ही रास्ता है कि हमको सस्टेनेबल होना पड़ेगा, पर्यावरण को ध्यान में रखना पड़ेगा, और हमको बायोडिग्रेडेबल उत्पादों की तरफ ही जाना पड़ेगा। इसके अतिरिक्त हमारे पास कोई रास्ता नहीं है। तो हम यूं कहे कि हम बदलना चाहेंगे या नहीं चाहेंगे, ये हमारी मर्जी पर नहीं है, हमको बदलना ही पड़ेगा, अन्यथा हमको व्यापार खोना पड़ेगा। इसलिए बदलना ही एक उपाय है, और हम उस उपाय की तरफ ग्रामीण मंत्रालय की तरफ से, रूरल डेवलपमेंट मिनिस्ट्री की तरफ से इस विषय में आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, और हम इस कोशिश में अग्रसर हैं कि आने वाले कुछ वर्षों में एक पायलट प्रोजेक्ट की तरह हम एक छोटा, चाहे 20 यूनिट्स के लिए हम एक ऐसा ब्लॉक लेकर आए जो कि कंप्लीटली सस्टेनेबल प्रैक्टिसेस को वहां पर जगह दे। यही हमारा प्राथमिक ध्येय है सस्टेनेबिलिटी को पाने के लिए। जी,
if I can add just one thing. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, please.
I think Monisha was saying this. So what we have seen here, and just what can be the solution? See, what we have done, we have actually tried to analyze the economics of everything. So we have plotted economics, right? So we are building a dam. What is the economics, right? We are cutting all the trees. We are taking out the biodiversity. We are planting monoculture, palm cultivation. What is the economics? What is the per hectare, output of the whole thing? So we have done, different crops. We are saying today government is saying 3 lakhs for a hectare of land, which will come from palm cultivation, right? But they are not saying who will get this 3 lakhs, the farmer or that big company. I cannot tell you. I will be in jail tomorrow. Right. So there are 3 companies which has been identified to do the processing work, and and the farmer. So who will get the majority of this? So we have plotted everything, and we have seen, if we do the cultural area production, right? We are still giving, we have still the option of having the highest earning for everybody who are in that value chain. Right? Be that be that the palm cultivation, be that making the other things which are there, like bamboo and other things which are there, the tea cultivation. We have found that that if we can do eri silk and do the entire eri silk within that ecosystem, which we are now doing, and and people are accepting us outside, right? Then it is possible that we save this biodiversity without sacrificing anything, right? But the problem is, there is a problem. The problem is, when there is a plantation economy which comes in, right? What happens? Your top line increases. Suddenly, the farmer will be, doing business of 5 lakhs.
Yeah.
But in the end of the year or end of the 2 years, when they will, see, okay, what is the return, right? You will find that return, that bottom line is less than what the traditional practices are giving, right? All this value of that, top line is actually by somebody else outside, because somebody else is giving you fertilizers, that person is earning fertilizer money, right? Then somebody is giving you insecticides, that person is earning or that organization is earning the insecticide money, and he's taking out that money. So there is a top line increase in the economy, right? But bottom line increase is not there. Bottom line, they are becoming poorer, and they are dependent on things from outside, and the ecology and biodiversity is risking. So what is the solution? Solution is is there. We have calculated that if we we have 6,500 hectares of land, because this pilot is phased around 6,500 hectares of land. If we sell our product, right, for X per meter, right, that person will not only conserve the forest, but that person will actually contribute conservation of forest by paying 112 euros per hectare. So
it's a big number game. Yeah.
So it's so simple. It is possible, right? So that's what actually I feel after this we were in Sustainable Angel in June. So we had a lot of conversation with LVMH, carrying with all these sustainability speakers, who speak very big about sustainability, and then we had one-to-one discussion with that, and we feel like we have a solution, right? The product which we are doing, right, can actually change the whole thing, right? We just need patience. We just need to continue what we are doing, and if it is and if that happens, this biocultural continuity will solve both the problem of economy as well as the biodiversity. And it is
yeah.
Sorry,
yeah, no. So just saying to wrap this up and hand it to Meera, that we have very interesting comments in the chat box as well, where there is this idea of compliance, and where the idea of building local narratives while addressing the issues of compliance within the craft economies being one. And also the role of civil society organizations like Neela House, as someone mentioned. So they did this training program in Bagru, Akola, Kaladera, these villages in Rajasthan, to help them explore natural dyes, the viability of it, the feasibility of using it, also efficient water usage practice. There's Bodhi in Vadodara. So there are many civil society organizations, social entrepreneurs who have tried to reach the compliances and reach the solutions within their setup, but scale is a problem. And so I'm leaving this conversation with that note, because we can just build on it, and happy to share the video after Meera gives her closing remarks. Thank you so much, Brij, Ballabh, Monisha, and Rituraj.
Thanks. Thank you. This was a very, very informative and stimulating discussion. I mean, we've had like 32 people who stayed for 2 hours. That itself is proof that how interesting it was. I'm not going to talk much because I know people want to leave. But I think we have a lot of experts here who attended today, Rebecca, Sonam, a lot of other people who have been working in the field. But I think the biggest takeaway for me is what Brij Ballabh also said, that I think being sustainable is no longer going to be a choice. It's something that we will have to change. I mean, there's no question if we want to exist. But the danger is that a lot of greenwashing can happen, has already, we already see it. So what is it that, what are the solutions that we can find? Because I think a lot of things are against us. The market, the way the market operates, which is affecting biodiversity as a result, the whole conservation, which in turn is affecting livelihoods, and so many other cultural factors. So I think there's a lot of information we have got today to process. And maybe, Surucchi, I think we should do a brief synopsis of the points that have come out,
Yeah.
and start building the conversation by sharing it across various platforms. But the big sort of takeaway for me has been that if everything is against us, the market, the government policies, the climate, even nature, which of course a lot of it is what we are calling now human induced. So where do we find the solutions? And that, I think, is the magic, that the solutions can really emerge from very small efforts, of individuals and groups and communities who have actually built this, worked on the wisdom that they've had over centuries, and the new experiments that are happening because of pioneers and people with courage who are going and trying to address these problems. So I think there's a lot for us as a series to take forward and to learn from each other and to build this, this whole understanding. And hopefully this will become a movement in time. So let's see how it goes. You want to quickly announce that there will be a talk every month now, and that
Yes,
there will
yes.
be a talk after each talk.
Yeah,
And
so because Ballabh ji spoke about traceability, आपने ये word use करा, तो मैं ये बताना चाहूंगी कि as part of the creative talks that is in the initiative of Creative Dignity, we will continue with the climate series for a couple of more months, and the next conversation that we will have will be in November to understand, what is the technological solution that can be brought up that's already in the market. Some pilots have already happened. So what does that entail? क्या मतलब है traceability का, टेक्नोलॉजी कैसे यूज हो सकती है feasibly एक artisanal level पे, समझने के लिए कि हम पीछे जा सकते हैं, पूरी वैल्यू चेन को ट्रैक कर सकते हैं और इसका बेनिफिट क्या है. तो ये देखना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है और इंटरेस्टिंग रहेगा. इसके बाद द नेक्स्ट कॉन्वर्सेशन व्हिच वी विल हैव इन डिसेंबर इज गोइंग टू बी अबाउट अंडरस्टैंडिंग रेलेवेंट पॉइंटेड कम्युनिकेशन स्ट्रेटजीज दैट कैन बी हेल्पफुल टू हैंडमेड एंड क्रिएटिव मैन्युफैक्चरिंग बिजनेसेस. So this is our plan going forward. And I already feel that, in terms of pilots, I see some reciprocity, and I think I will approach you. We will, as Creative Dignity, maybe approach you and see, how we can take this forward. But yeah, a lot of positive notes there.
yeah, and I think we should also, if the panelists are okay with it, we should also connect them to CD. And
Yeah.
so, if members want to reach out to them, one or two, to understand what they're doing, they want to collaborate or understand better, then that can come possible.
Definitely happy to share the link. And Rituraj, Monisha, would be lovely to have you join the group. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us. And if there are any questions that we can take from the audience, happy to open it. You can just unmute yourself and ask and address the panelists that you would like to speak to.
I think, Surucchi, people have begun leaving because
Okay.
actually it was half our conversation and we've almost become like it's gone to 2 hours. So I think a lot of people have left, but so this is not the end. We have to continue all these conversations. So
Great.
we will.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you to Monisha, Brij Ballabh ji, and Rituraj ji, especially for sharing your experience, vision, and knowledge with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.